Welcome to another edition of the Energy Week podcast. Ryan Ray alongside Dr. Energy herself, Ellen Wald. Ellen, how was your Thanksgiving?
I ate a lot of turkey and a lot of other things. So I'd say it was a success, and nobody killed each other. Nobody got into any huge screaming arguments. So when you combine the food and the lack of family arguing, I think we give it a thumbs up. How about you?
It was very good. Went back to Louisiana for a few days. And so, no one, same, good food. No one killed themselves. And so,
or anyone else in the family.
Yeah,
or threw anyone into the pool.
None of that. Not this time. Yeah. So, but you know what? You were talking offline. I had to bring this to the attention of everyone. You made it a very astute observation. For Amazon, Jeff Bezos, please get rid of Cyber Monday. Ellen pointed that out. Like, who has time for Cyber Monday? We're working here. We're recording hard-hitting analysis of news. We don't have time to check out every Kindle deal. So Black Friday, Ellen, as you pointed out.
But we want to.
We want to. We would love to.
We want to. So when you send my phone a message saying I got something on sale and I'm recording a podcast or in a meeting, I just can't do anything. So Black Friday, though, I could have. Yeah. You know what Amazon would say to that?
They don't care.
You need to invest in Alexa, who will automatically shop the deals for you.
That's the conspiracy.
They're going to, the next year, we're going to have the AI shopper bot.
Well, yeah. Well, get the credit cards off Amazon now. So one programming note, Ellen, I did record today kind of a 30 to 45 minute overview for those who might be interested about my trip to China. So kind of some thoughts or whatnot. That will come out after, like, the same time this podcast comes out the next day. So if you listen to any of the other shows I do, it's the same one. If you don't, then here's your spot to hear it if that's of interest to you. So kind of a high level.
Well, I would highly advise the listeners to check that out, because I got the private version of Ryan's trip, and was it interesting? So I would definitely.
It's not as good as the off the record conversation.
Off the record, yeah.
It was my on the record take, but it was a good trip. And so other thing is, Ellen, we had a listener reach out, Man United Forever, and I did not get a chance to listen to the podcast or episode he wanted to, but I will listen to it for next week's show. So just wanted to mention that. I just traveling and all that didn't get a chance to get her done, but I tried to last night and it just didn't happen. So anyway, I will try to get to that next week and give my feedback there. But with that being said, we do have news from China. China and Russia are partners and now have a 55 with a billion pipeline to prove it. Ellen, this is a long project. It's an 1,800-mile pipeline through some cold. Talk about being cold. This is some cold parts of the earth they're going through. And we talked about Russia and what they're doing in Europe. Now they're kind of moving east officially, if you will.
Yeah, this was really interesting. The opening of this pipeline has been reported on by a bunch of different news outlets. I read a piece in Platts about it. There's a piece in Financial Times about it. But I think that this Wall Street Journal article takes a slightly more geopolitical tone to this event, which is why I definitely recommend that our listeners take a look at the whole article. There's also some really nice graphics that give you a sense of like where the pipeline actually is in the world. And I'm not saying that because I agree with the argument that's being made in this piece, because I don't actually necessarily agree with it, but it really, it's an interesting perspective to consider. So, and I'll also tell you a little story about what happened when I shared this article on Twitter on Sunday night. Boring Sunday night, no good football games on. I'm like scrolling through stuff, and so one of the points in this article is basically in the Wall Street Journal article is essentially that they're saying that that China and Russia, that this kind of pipeline represents more than just an energy partnership, but is really kind of heralding a new type of strategic partnership for global markets and trade. And it's potentially heralding this new kind of political order of which the United States and Europe are not really part of. And one of the things that I was kind of thinking about as I was reading this was, so, the Nord Stream pipeline, Nord Stream 2 gets a lot of interest and coverage, and people are like terrified. Oh my God, Russian influence over Europe and Germany, and Gerhard Schroeder, the former chancellor, is on the board of Gazprom and all this stuff. And so why was there none of this abject terror at the idea that Russia is basically going to be China's primary natural gas supplier? And I was kind of thinking, like why is this? And there were a couple of things I came up with. So one is the fact that, and this, maybe you could speak more to this, but this idea, like China is not going to let anyone influence itself. Like China doesn't seem to like fall for that. Like if you look back historically, even when China went communist and there was this Soviet-China partnership, it was like over in the blink of an eye. And Mao had his own way, and China was its own thing, and he had his little red book, and he was not going to let Stalin tell him what to do, or Khrushchev or anyone else. And so China has always, I guess, kind of maintained a level of independence that really doesn't let you think that it's ever going to let itself be heavily influenced by Russia. And then the other thing is also a Cold War issue, is that why are we so worried about Russian influence in Europe? Well, because Europe ain't like China. Like Europe likes to let itself be influenced by Russia, especially, Germany. And so, so there's this big fear, and it seems almost like that's a holdover from the Cold War era, the era where we were all so concerned about the encroachment of Soviet or Russian influence into Europe. And so part of me thinks that like maybe we need to get out of that Cold War mindset and kind of open up to look at other avenues. And then another part of me thinks, well, China's never really historically let itself be influenced by Russia. So is this pipeline really going to herald a new, era of Russian hegemony? I don't know. Anyway, what are your thoughts?
When Gene Epstein comes on, I want him, if he might not have, we didn't tell him we talked about this, but him to talk about the Russian economy. I've heard him make remarks before about it, so I'm curious about their GDP. If you actually look it up, where it actually plays in the grand scheme of things. The other thing is interesting.
I can actually give you some statistics on that, because I did look it up last night when I was Twittering.
Yeah.
So I will
ahead.
tell you.
It's very unimpressive, but go ahead.
Yeah. So as I discovered last night, so the Russia's GDP is lower than California's GDP, it's lower than New York's GDP, it's lower than Texas's GDP individually. It does beat out Florida. I will give it that. It beats out Florida. But joke. But GDP per capita, it's like a little higher than Mississippi's.
Well, if you look at it by country, by country, it's like the Maldives or something have them beat or something. It's really bad. It's not, if you look at, I think they're ranked 55 or something like that. But Gene can kind of weigh in on what that actually means, and obviously you have some insight as well. But when you hear all this talk about Russia this, we're scared of Russia, it's like, it's not like they have some large economy. They would be one of the states here in the U.S., and so they're not. It's just not the same thing. The other thing is, Ellen, I found interesting. There was a line in this article, and I think I closed it out or moved it. There was a line in this article that said something to the effect of they struck a deal with Huawei technology to develop their mobile 5G or whatever it is, 5E technology in China. Okay, one of the things that's interesting about that, and I don't have an opinion one way or another, you might have looked into this more than I have. One of the fears about the Huawei 5G stuff is that they can use it to spy on whoever they want to. And so I thought that was interesting that if those concerns are legit, and again, I don't really have a dog in the hunt, I don't know, that China is providing them with mobile service, which would then allow the Chinese to spy on the Russians, which would be interesting because it's like, well, okay, because you supply us with energy, but we also have the capacity to listen to all your phone conversations or read your text messages or whatever. That actually balances out the influence, right? Because, we can send propaganda messages to all your citizens, so I don't know what to believe about what Huawei can and can't do, but the fear is what they will do with it and how they can weaponize it. And I was like, well, if you're scared about the Chinese being influenced by the Russians, what about the Chinese or the Russians influencing China? What about the other way around with the Huawei technology?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that the time has come for me to actually learn how to spell Huawei, considering what a big impact it's clearly having in geopolitical discussions and energy. So yeah, it's definitely not how I spelled it right now.
Yeah, it's Huawei. Huawei.
Thank you.
But
All right.
And again, I don't know if they can use it to spy or not. But I have heard some folks that are concerned that it will be used, weaponized in that manner, and that's why they're trying to keep it out of Europe. And so when I was reading this piece, I was like, okay, yeah, I get you're afraid of the Russians' impact on China, this, that, and the other. It's like, well, hold on, well, if they got the Huawei there, then if what I've been told is true, then they actually have almost the bigger weapon because they can. They can listen to what Putin's saying, or they could sell the data to them, or I'm not saying it has to be nefarious. They can do a lot of stuff with it, but as we talk about when you look at these deals, it's just rarely we talk about these geopolitical partnership agreements. It's just not 1 + 1 = 2. It's not like saying Ellen walks into Walmart and she buys a Snickers bar. There's more to it. There's like, well, Ellen's got to buy a Snickers bar every day, and Ellen's got to go to the store, and then she's got to buy. So, and it's like sometimes we flatten these out, and the other thing is when I was in China, there was a lot of talk about balancing the trade deficit, and a lot of them expressed interest in buying our LNG to help balance the trade deficit. So if they get from 400 million middle class up to 60% of their 1.4 billion, whatever that number is, they're going to probably need more LNG than this one pipeline will provide, if I had to guess. Also, what about the maintenance on this thing? I would not want to be in Siberia like, hey, Ryan, it's 2 a.m. We need you to go check the valve out there.
Oh, God. Maybe they have robots for that.
Oh, I don't know. But, yeah, I mean, God, it's got to be cold.
Well, I know that so when I was there, I was at Aramco a couple of years ago. They were showing me these robots that they invented to basically, check and do, maintenance on pipelines and big tall things where it's it's dangerous for humans to go up there because they could fall or whatever, but I guess who cares if you lose the robot, right? So I don't know, maybe they have robots that work in minus, what is it, minus 40? Too cold
for me. Whatever it is, it's just cold. Yeah. When you're in Siberia, you don't think warm beaches, sun, tan. Those words never go through your mind.
Yeah, well, in Russia, they're hardier folk. They just
they're tougher than
just pound some vodka and
Yeah. Okay. Let's go to the Wall Street Journal again. Saudis push for longer lasting OPEC cuts as Aramco IPO approaches. Now, I got to say, when I read this headline, it felt like a partial victory for my IPO theory. It did feel like hey, the Aramco is going to think the prices are going to be higher. I didn't know it meant they were going to bully folks into that position, but it's a partial win that they're expecting prices to go up by throwing their weight around.
Yeah, see, I really can't stand when people are and Saudi Arabia will do this in OPEC because of Aramco IPO. Yeah. You're like, okay, let's unpack the reasoning here. All right, so your reasoning is that Saudi Arabia is going to try to do what on the same day that they're announcing the share price for the IPO? That means that it's not going to happen. It's the same day. So OPEC could come out and announce we're cutting another, million barrels of oil per day, and oil prices could go up. But if they've already announced the share price, what are they looking to impact for the IPO? They're not looking to impact the IPO. They're looking to impact what happens after the IPO.
Post-IPO,
right?
Yeah, no.
It's post-IPO trading.
Yeah, so so I'm sorry, I went clear. Post-IPO next year.
No, it's not you. It's everybody else.
But I mean, that's a great point. And so post-IPO observation would be as if, I don't know what Brent's at today. I think WTI is 55 or whatever. But let's just say it went down to 45 next year. Then their stock, which already didn't get the valuation that they wanted, would take a significant hit potentially. And so they need to make sure the prices are up and to the right. Well,
hold on. Okay. Here's my theory. And all these listeners, you're getting an advanced view because it's going to come out in a Bloomberg piece really, really early Wednesday morning. The advanced notice is coming here. Okay. So let's think about this from the perspective of a publicly traded oil company like Exxon or Chevron or Total. Okay. So your earnings are coming up, or they're coming up in a couple months, and you aren't actually producing all of the oil you could be producing for whatever reason. You're just your taps are not on full speed, and like oil prices are kind of low, and you want to show revenue growth because that's going to pump up your stock because you want to, I don't know, sell more stock come in the next quarter. You got stock you want to sell. So what do you do to show revenue growth? Sell more oil, produce more, right? There's nothing you can do to push up the price of oil. So you might as well produce more to sell more because selling more will show up as revenue and profit on your balance sheet. As long as it's not oil that costs you a hideous amount to produce, right? You can just sell more and it'll show up on your balance sheet. So then when your earnings come around, you've got revenue growth and profit growth. And so your share price will go up regardless of what the price of oil is. I mean, you're not going to push the price of oil down that much, right? Selling an extra, so then your share price will go up and you sell more and you make more money. So not all oil companies, basically every publicly traded oil company is producing everything that it can. It's not like hanging on to like spare capacity just for like giggles and a rainy day.
I got to interject there because I forgot about this. This is someone told me this that they were told, so I'm not saying this is accurate or true. This is this oil field workers talking.
Oil field worker gossip. Excellent.
Right. They are a vendor who does work for this particular company. And they said that they were, they're drilling out in the Permian in a certain spot of the Permian, and that they were told that the break-even price, I'm going to make the numbers up, are like 35 in that part of the Permian. But in a different part where they have some acreage, it's at 10 or 15. And that what they're doing is they're holding off on drilling that until the prices go up. So not only will they tap into the cheaper acreage, but then their profits will actually grow greater than what they should be.
So they'll suddenly come up with massive profit growth in quarter X.
Right. So instead of getting $30 a break even, you're getting 15. You're getting like double the profit, and you do the same thing. And they're planning on doing that. I think it's Q1 or Q2 of 2020. And again, I'm not saying it's true or not true, but it was interesting because right now, if you think about it, they could be doing that now, making more money. But then when they had to drill the more expensive stuff and the prices were higher, if the prices do go up, you wouldn't make as much even though the prices are up. Well, now you can kind of skew the numbers the complete opposite way. So anyways, I'm sorry.
Okay, so think about it. No, but it's a good point. But like every company is thinking about how they can best optimize.
Exactly.
Their revenue because but Aramco has never had to think like that, or Saudi Arabia, because they don't matter. Who cares? They weren't a publicly traded company, so who cares about their share price? Who cares about their what their revenue looks like this quarter versus last quarter? The Saudi government might care, but they can always take a bigger dividend if they need more money. So whatever. So basically, my argument is that why try to push the oil price up? They suck at trying to push oil prices up. OPEC is bad at it right now. So if in Aramco's like in the Saudi mindset, why not just pump more, show more revenue, pump up your stock price before you want to sell? Why bother with trying to raise oil prices by curbing production, which isn't going to work anyway? What are you going to get, like $2 a barrel?
You might have answered this before, and I don't remember. The exchange in Saudi Arabia, how long do they have to be listed on there before they can delist? Do you know that answer? To
delist?
Yeah, they want to come off the exchange.
I don't know. Okay. That I don't know. Okay. I could ask someone. That I don't know. I know that when they IPO, they're like locked in for like 6 months for selling more like shares except to sovereign wealth funds. This is actually an interesting question that I don't know the answer to, because according to the the IPO prospectus, they are contractually obligated not to put more shares on the market for a year, but they're contractually obligated by the underwriters. Mm-hmm. But they're not using the underwriters anymore. Mm-hmm. Remember, they like kicked them to the curb. So I don't know if they're still contractually obligated for that. But anyway, I don't know. That's a really good question.
It's interesting just because, here in the States, obviously, I wonder if part of their reason for going with that exchange is they could maybe, they get out there and they don't like how it's going. They could, transition, get off. Or if it goes really well, then they could go to other exchanges. It feels like they've gone
Why bother transitioning? Why not just manipulate the entire exchange?
Well,
I mean, you're Saudi Arabia. All you have to do is call up some pension funds and some mutual fund managers in banks, and say, hey guys, buy more Aramco stock.
That's true. So it's so interesting, this whole process and how they're doing things. It's kind of like, okay, well, where are they going next? And because I know there's some differences there, but essentially I would assume that they wanted to get off the exchange, and for whatever reason in Saudi Arabia it'd be far easier than the penalties they would incur here in the U.S. or London or wherever. So.
Oh yeah.
Okay, let's see here. I think we got time for one more article before Gene Epstein comes on, and I'm going to skip one.
We should talk about the booze.
Okay, you talk about the booze. Let's talk about the booze.
We got to talk about India and the booze.
From India, from Bloomberg. Booze may be hurdle to India's energy independence. By
the way, just so the viewers know, we were having this discussion about Cyber Monday. So Bloomberg has now told me I can get 50% off with their Cyber Monday deal. So.
Oh.
Of course, you're not going to be listening to this until Tuesday, but maybe they'll extend and have Cyber Tuesday too. You never know. So,
we've talked a lot about the problems in India, mainly the taxes that they put on their fuel. The booze let me just read this little snippet here. Asia's third biggest economy would like to boost the amount of ethanol in gasoline from 20% in a decade to 6% now to cut dependence on foreign oil, which is currently more than 80%. That is an extreme dependence on foreign oil, 80% dependent on that, especially with a large population that India has. And go ahead.
Also, can we talk about the picture that accompanies this article? So it's showing bales of sugarcane, and they're being hauled by bulls, by animals, not cars or trucks that run on gasoline or diesel.
Well, they can't afford it. It's too expensive. It's too expensive to put gasoline and diesel in there.
But guys, India, please learn from the United States. Do not put food in your cars. Okay? Like I everybody who listens to the show knows that I'm like the most skeptical EV person ever, but like invest in EV technology and infrastructure and charging instead of investing in ethanol production. Because it's a bad idea. You're going to want that food. You really don't want to screw up your food economy by putting fuel into it. I mean, we've so messed up our agriculture economy and our corn economy with these ethanol subsidies that it's like, don't do this to yourself, please, India.
Speaking of that, did I mention about the batteries for EVs in China and Elon Musk? Okay, so one of the things that I heard while I was there is, remember we talked about this on the show, that Panasonic and Musk were kind of having a tit for tat, and the article portrayed it as they didn't like how Musk was out on Twitter and doing all this stuff and da-da-da. What I was told when I was in China is the real reason is that CATL, I think is the name of the battery company, the largest and best battery company is in China, and Musk knows it, and he's wanting to do business with them. But Panasonic had an exclusive agreement, and they felt like he was stabbing him in the back because he was going with them. Did we talk about that, or did I dream that? I mean, I know I heard it.
I don't think so. That is interesting.
Because if you remember, we talked about Musk on the show, and they were saying that the Panasonic was mad because of his antics on Twitter and this, that, and the other. But they were saying that that Panasonic had an exclusive agreement with them, but Musk found these guys and they're better. They can produce more, whatever, and he wants to, diversify his battery technology and. I think it's CATL. I can look it up later on. We can put the show notes. But anyways, I found that was interesting because you talk about India and EV technology. If they're right, then you've got some good batteries right there around the corner with your neighbors in China, which has, I might add, electric scooters that you literally cannot hear. Like, they might run you over if you're not paying attention because they are so quiet. You talk about whisper technology. These dudes are silent. I mean, it is crazy how good they are. But I do agree with you. What you're saying, though, generally is, hey, there is other things other than messing up your food distribution methods for the sake of ethanol, and better technology to invest in than just the good old-fashioned corn stock. Of course, the corn people of America will not be happy we said that.
No, they won't. I'm sure they'd love nothing more than to export ethanol to India. But guys, like really, it's so weird because it's like, if they want to put more ethanol in gasoline, they want to put biofuel in. Like, why are we putting food into our vehicles?
Yep.
And that's just like the worst idea ever. I mean, and also the environmental impacts of this stuff are massive. You think it's not, but it is. I mean, like the fertilizer, the damage that it does. I mean, it's not just like carbon emissions. There's a lot more to it.
Okay, give me 30 seconds. We don't have time to get to the full story. What is going on with Iraq, though, for folks who might want to hear your comments on that with the Prime Minister?
Yeah, so apparently the Prime Minister has decided or has said he's going to resign, and the Parliament approved his resignation. This has to do a lot with the massive protests that have been going on. I think that the idea is that is that they're looking to see less Iranian influence in the Iraqi government, and also less corruption, tons of corruption. And, it's not clear what's really going to happen with the Iraqi government, but, this was like an emergency session called on Sunday, but it's definitely something to watch because there's a lot of instability going on in Iraq, and what happens with this new government is very important.
Okay, and remind us real quick, we remember President Bush, State of the Union, the blue thumbs, everyone voted for the new leader back then. How far? This
is a new guy,
right? So how many people? Is it one? Are we one person removed? Two people?
I think we're one person.
One person
yeah, I'm pretty sure we are.
It's not the same group, but at least one person, maybe two removed.
It's not the same guy. Okay. It may be the same political party.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's fine. I didn't.
That's important to know.
Kind of sprung that on you, but I was just curious if it was the same.
It's a good question. Okay. I'm not up on my Iraqi prime minister succession count. I will give you that.
Well, it's interesting because if you just step back from just kind of a geopolitical perspective, there's riots and protests and a lot of unrest going on, globally right now. It's kind of hard to cover all of the unrest that you see, whether the Yellow Jackets or wherever they are in France, and you got folks in Chile, and obviously talk about Venezuela. Oh, one of the guys on the trip is from Colombia and talks about Venezuela, and is going to come on and kind of give us the Colombian Venezuela side of just kind of what's going on down there. So I don't know if we'll get to it in December or not, but get him on maybe January to kind of hear about how they view it from. He lives in D.C. now, but how they view it. From a South American perspective, which is something we hadn't had on this show and don't get a lot of. But anyways, if you look at this kind of the unrest that's going on globally, it's not just Iraq. There's folks everywhere that are mad. Hong Kong, So it's a shame that the American news doesn't cover more geopolitical stuff than what it does.
No, because instead we have to cover did Joe Biden stick his thumb in his wife's mouth, or vice versa, or something stupid like that. No, did he accidentally eat his wife's thumb at a campaign event? Not interesting.
Or Kofefe, or whatever that tweet was. There's 3 days of Kofefe, and did Trump get 2 scoops of ice cream or what? Or the important stuff. So
yeah.
And up next we have on, I guess you can call recurring guest now, Gene Epstein, who is the director at the Soho Forum, and you can find out more information at thesohoforum.org, thesohoforum.org. I got it right this time. Kudos to me. Mr. Epstein, a couple things about the Soho Forum real quick before we get into it. I was listening to you and Dave Smith the other day tout your defeat of communism or socialism in a debate. When can our listeners, if they want to hear you wreck shop, when could they go, or how could they go and check out that debate?
Well, first of all, call me Gene. I'm Gene Epstein. And second, it's been up. If you go to just thesohoforum.org, then you can get your choice of either watching the video, and we've now had nearly 200,000 views of the video recorded on YouTube, or going to the audio, going to the podcast. You can go into the Soho Forum Debates, special podcast link, to listen to the podcast of that debate. And it's been up for a while, and it's gotten a lot of attention, and I'm very gratified by that.
Okay, we'll be sure to link to that in the show notes. And also, I did hear you mention the other day that someone at the forum, I'm not sure, you know the name, that is close to the forum, maybe founded the forum or was a donor to the forum, passed away, and just want to give you a chance to recognize them publicly here for our listeners who aren't familiar with their work they contributed to the forum.
Well, thanks very much for that. That was a great guy named Don Smith, a guy I'd known for a number of years. He had been a poor hog farmer out from the Midwest, and he made it big in New York. He ran something called deep value investing for major funds. He became quite wealthy, and over the last 10, 20 years, he's been a major libertarian donor. Happily, I know his daughter. I know the people who help run the firm and run the foundation that Don Smith left, and I think that will continue to get support from his foundation. But we do. He was 78 years old. I guess for you young people, that was a pretty long life. I'm 75, so that just gives me 3 years to go. So you better get all you can.
Get all you can. And you just celebrated your 75th birthday, if I understood correctly. So happy belated birthday.
Correct.
Okay, well, let's get into a couple of things Ellen and I want to talk to you about. Obviously, we had you on almost a year ago now, I guess it was. Talk about the inverted yield curve and the impacts of that. And we also were talking earlier about the Russian GDP and kind of how this misnomer is that Russia can take over the world and their GDP really doesn't reflect the ability to do that. So I'll let you kind of start on either of those topics and where we're at with either one of those, and we'll kind of go from there.
Well, first, the yield curve was inverted for a brief period a few months ago. It is not inverted at this point. Now, what do we mean by an inverted yield curve? We should explain it. It's a relatively rare situation in which short-term interest rates are higher than long-term interest rates. Normally, you would expect that if you're going to lend money for the long term, 10 years, say, that you'd expect a somewhat higher interest rate than if you lend it for the short term, let's say 3 months. But then every once in a while, the 3-month interest rate, in particular as measured by the government's treasury obligations, the 3-month goes over, becomes higher than the 10-month. And that signals something potentially disturbing. It does mean that possibly investment over the 10 years is just not promising. It signals something disturbing. And empirically, whenever that happens for a couple of months in a row, we normally get a recession about a year or two later. And so it's a very relatively reliable indicator. It has very few false alarms, as I'd put it. Technically, they like to call them false positives. But most indicators that do precede recession, like a declining stock market, have a lot of false alarms. This one doesn't have very many at all. And so it was disturbing when this happened. It's not true anymore. The 10-year is above the 3-year once again. However, it does mean that we should consider the possibility that there could be a recession. That's a fascinating long story in itself. How bad will it be? How likely is it going to happen that in the next 12 months? If it does happen in 2020, it will obviously make an enormous difference in the election chances of any Democratic president. A sitting incumbent president can almost never survive a recession going into an election. And so that would completely sink Trump's chances of being reelected. For example, so that's a source of interest and concern. My own best guess is probably the expansion that's currently underway that has indeed set records. It's into its 11th year. It's the longest expansion on record at this point, although it's been, of course, a relatively slow expansion, but slow but steady sort of wins the race. We're doing pretty well. Better to grow for 10 and a half years as we have than to just grow faster under the Bush administration, say for 6 years. We grew faster, but it only lasted 6 years. Now it's 10 and a half years. And wages are rising. A lot of good things are happening to ordinary people. So I welcome the expansion. I hope it continues. And I think it will probably persist through 2020 and into 2021. That's my best guess.
Okay.
But you want to talk about Russian GDP, but go ahead. What's your next?
Just a quick follow-up. Just you want to give us long one on this one. The tariff trade war, does that factor into any of these things? If Trump does sign something, does that push things back, speed things up? Because the last few months, the thought of phase one getting done got everyone excited, and now it's kind of died off. But when you said that's a lot of false positives, will the trade war impact any of these signals that you're referring to?
Well, the trade war Trump's trade war is insanity. Look, I think Trump is slightly crazy. On the other hand, I do have mixed feelings about Trump, just like many libertarians have. I mean, the thing I have to admit I perversely like about the guy is that he's such an open buffoon. And I always regard politicians from Obama to Clinton to the rest of them to Bush as sort of closeted buffoons. They try to maintain a certain decorum. I like the way Trump just sort of lets it all hang out, and so that's why. But that aside, and I don't think he's not quite as bad as in certain ways he's not quite as bad as Obama was. But you forced me to digress because you mentioned Trump. But you asked me about Trump's trade policies. As a matter of fact, getting back to the Soho Forum, I'm going to be debating economist Steve Moore, who is been an advisor of the Trump administration. And Steve Moore is going to be defending Trump's trade war with China. They think it's crazy. It's definitely caused harm. It's definitely slowed manufacturing. However, it doesn't appear to have been sufficient to bring the economy down. I don't think it's going to be crucial in causing a recession, no matter what the outcome is of the trade talks with China, insofar as that particular question is concerned.
Okay. Ellen, Russia, GDP, where you want to
go? Yeah, let's talk about that because we're hearing the drums of war are being started. That somehow Russia and China are taking over the world together.
Wow.
Let's.
China, the Sino-Soviet. That's amazing. I didn't know Soviet. Of course, I shouldn't use the word Soviet.
They opened a pipeline, and now the whole world is at their mercy.
Yeah, I'm glad. No, I read that and about the pipeline, and I think it's actually good news. There's been historical enmity and border clashes between Russia and China over the many years. I mean, when Russia was part of the Soviet Union, and it's always good to know that if there's a pipeline between two countries, maybe the shooting war that did occasionally erupt between these two countries, maybe that will slow down. Maybe that's not going to happen. The idea that once they forge a pipeline, they're going to forge a military alliance. And then what are they going to do next? I mean, I guess, look, we have to have some flesh on these bones. Were they going to march on New York? What exactly is going to happen next? I mean, you're saying that they're forging an alliance and they're a threat to the world. So please tell me, because I have not heard I'm not familiar with this kind of latest lunacy about what's going to happen. What's the claim beyond that? That's kind
of where we wanted you to weigh in. Is that?
Oh wow, okay.
Not what you expect to do, but from our standpoint, we hear it. And we're like, okay, well, if you look at the Russian economy, it just them alone can't do anything. And
Italy, they got
It feels like, as Ellen was pointing out earlier, a lot of the narrative around Russia and what they can and can't do is very much Cold War era-esque, not modern. And so, as someone who studies the work with parents and all that stuff, just kind of help for our listeners. We were breaking down where the Russian GDP was, like the third or fourth biggest state in the United States, if it was one of our states. What does that mean? Like,
it's on a par with Italy. Its GDP, and because the real, as you know, I mean, they are the Saudi Arabia of Asia. They're sitting on a lot of oil and a lot of natural gas, but in fact, of course, once the price, and they were doing much better when the price of oil was above $100. But the biggest blow against Russian prospects and Russian standing in the world and Russian GDP was leveled by our own domestic frackers who developed U.S. oil. The U.S. is now the close to being the major producer of oil in the world because of the advent of fracking. And now the price of oil is $55-$60, way below the $100 that it used to be at. And the Russian economy has suffered as a result. Basically, they're not. They have this size. The GDP is about on a par with Italy. They're a relatively poor country, 50 million people. They're pretty much of a non-entity in the world. They're obviously a threat to their own backyard, like many countries are. But I personally believe, having lived through the Cold War, I believe that it was always insanity. Basically insanity to think of the Soviet Union as any kind of threat, even to Western Europe. There was never any chance that the Soviet Union was going to march on West Germany, France, England. Historically, the aggression has always occurred in the opposite direction. Nobody in Europe is afraid. Nobody in Western Europe is the least bit afraid of the Russians. Beyond that, the more interesting case, of course, is China. China clearly that's a country with 1.3 billion people, and it does have a GDP that is approximately the size of the U.S. But of course, since they had more than 4 times as many people, productivity is only 25% of ours. They'd have to grow by 7% a year for the next 20 years for their per capita GDP to be on a par with that of the U.S. And then, of course, the U.S. will already have grown over the next 20 years and be ahead of them. So economically, of course, it's wonderful to have observed that China has made a turn toward capitalism, and that there has been economic growth since the turn toward capitalism. The market liberalization in the late 1970s that took place in China was a great thing for the world, and we have a win-win situation with China via Walmart. Walmart imports goods from China, sells cheap goods to poor Americans.
Sorry.
Why is that funny?
No, it's just funny that when most people start with the phrase, we have a wonderful relationship with China, they don't usually complete that phrase saying via Walmart, but I love that.
It's true. Right.
Well, no, indeed. Right. Yeah. And of course, look, if you're a libertarian sort of citizen of the world, then sort of a Martian visiting from out of space would say, I don't see any poor people in the U.S. All the poor people seem to be in countries like India and China and Africa. And so it has been a great thing that, by the way, inequality, the hobby horse of the progressives, has narrowed globally. It's narrowed globally mainly because of the turn toward capitalism in countries like China mainly, and to a great degree as well India, where a lot of poor people living in state poverty are now doing a lot better than they ever did before. Beyond that, the worst thing you can say about China, not about Russia so much, but about China, is that China definitely is a bit of a bully in its own backyard. I would think that the real solution to that is that countries like Japan, South Korea, Vietnam in particular, that has a long history of enmity with China, might form an alliance to exercise a countervailing force against China. Now, the other story as well about Russia, come to think of it, I'll meander on a little bit more, is that when the Cold War ended, the Russian leaders were assured that we would not push NATO any further than NATO already existed, that we would not crowd them, and yet we did. We did not keep our promise, and so clearly we do have in this country, we do have a lot of elements. Hillary Clinton was certainly one of them. A lot of elements that want war, want conflict, that thrive on it. I think that to the extent that there's any dispute between the U.S. and NATO and Russia, on the other hand, Russia has a lot to complain about. That's another story as well. Actually, Russia, the only other threat to the world is that Russia is sitting on a lot of nuclear weapons, and so I say let's applaud the fact if I shouldn't say it's a fact. If Trump is indeed cozying up to the Russians or operating as a Russian pawn, there's a silver lining of that, because the real fear in the world is that maybe there'd be a nuclear war, maybe there'd be a conflict between nuclear powers. And Russia, unfortunately, is indeed a poor country, no richer than Italy, and yet it is sitting on a nuclear arsenal. That's something we should do something about. We should have nuclear disarmament in the world. That is a worry. But I don't personally see any worry about Russia even being a threat to Western Europe, much less a threat to us. Certainly China is no threat to us. We'll put it this way. If we own the world, if the U.S. government owns the world, which is indeed is the Beltway philosophy, then I guess any country is an existential threat to us, because they might be threatening our ownership of the world.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
Do you have something? I have one if you don't. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so I guess final question. We're up against the clock here.
Yeah.
I was just in China, and there's a lot of talk about the China Belt and Road Initiative around the world. And one of the things I found interesting was being in Africa, some of the African nations aren't exactly thrilled with how some of those things come out when the World Bank funds a project in Africa and China comes in and how they do things. But there seems to be a concern about how China is, quote unquote, taking over the world through their Belt and Road Initiatives and how they're exporting all of this money. But it seems to me there's a big risk with what they're doing, because political instability in some of these countries can really put China where they're over leveraged by borrowing money from themselves to fund projects that aren't necessarily in their interest, in hopes of stabilizing their economy, bringing more people up through poverty. It seems like it's a big risk. I mean, I guess it could pay off, but just from an economic standpoint, what are some of the things that you see with that?
Well, I think the broad issue you really touched on, it really gets back to my own concern, and the concern that anybody should have about the well-being of peoples around the world and well-being of people in China. China did make a major turn toward capitalism. That has brought enormous progress, but they are still far from being far from being nearly as capitalist as, for example, the U.S. economy is, or the Canadian economy, or indeed the British economy. And so they do have a lot of government management of debt, government management of the economy, the delusion that the government can bring about innovation. And what you're touching on about their projects with respect to roads, I don't know enough about it. I suspect it just has to do with certain special interests. But beyond that, I'm concerned for the Chinese people insofar as that issue is concerned. The idea that we should be the least bit concerned if China truly is benefiting African countries, that's ridiculous. Not if you're a libertarian. You should be concerned only if, the sort of stuff you hear from people is that it's like we've got a football team and they've got a football team, and or we want to be popular in the high school class and they want to be popular, and if they're going to get more popular than us, that's an existential threat. Who cares? I just want more liberty and more freedom and more prosperity for the world, just like you do. And if the Chinese become richer than Americans, I'll applaud that as well, so long as we do as well as we possibly can. None of this is a contest.
It's funny to hear you say all this, because Ellen and I took a libertarian test the other day on the show.
Oh,
and
you did?
We didn't. I don't know where you're at. I believe you might be a full-on anarcho-capitalistic, which is I would be.
No, I'm not. Well,
okay, so I scored just slightly outside of the anarcho range. Ellen, I think, did as well. We were like min caps, I think, is where we.
Oh well, you guys. Well, that's congratulations. No, I always say to the anarcho-capitalists, I guess I'm too old and too weak-willed. I haven't thought it through completely. I've read and admired the anarcho-capitalists like Michael Huemer, David Friedman, Murray Rothbard in particular. But let's bring about the minarchist state, and then once we have the minarchy, let's duke it out over whether we want to go to complete anarchy. In other words, we all agree that at least the minarchist state is a step in the right direction.
Right. Let's get there first.
So maybe I wouldn't score quite as high as you guys would.
Oh, that's funny. Well, Gene, I think
there were a lot of questions about marijuana. legalization and things like that. So it definitely went into the social policies.
Well, it's Milton Friedman's line. Milton Friedman did. He was not obviously not everybody's favorite libertarian, nor was he mine, but he did have some nice blunt lines that the government has no more right to tell me what goes into my mouth than it has to tell me what comes out of my mouth. So there's a very big burden of proof that they're going to put you in a cage for either selling the stuff or using the stuff or using anything of that sort. And clearly, they can't bear that burden at all. We should have complete abolition of the drug laws, of course.
Well, Gene, it was wonderful. As I think Dave Smith calls you the godfather of the 5 libertarian families or something like that. So
only the New York Mafia.
The New York Mafia.
New York is a pretty big metropolis, so that's a big compliment. But there's somebody else who's running L.A.
Yeah.
So not me.
Not you. Okay. Well, it's good to have the godfather of the libertarian movement in New York on. Obviously, have good stuff. The sohoforum.org. You will be debating there as well and looking through the list here. You have Walter Block coming on here pretty soon. And
that's this coming Sunday. Yeah.
This coming Sunday. Okay.
Yeah.
And so we'll link to that in the show notes for any of our listeners up there that might be interested.
Well, if many of your listeners are based on the West Coast, then maybe they're not going to come to New York, see a Broadway show, do whatever else, see if you can coincide that with a Soho Forum debate. We have them every month, but then you might want to go into sohoforum.org because we've got now about 35 interesting debates that have been done, preserved on video, preserved on audio, in particular, as you mentioned, my socialism debate, which has gotten a lot of traction. We had a very good one on Bitcoin. That had 600,000 views. My socialism debate is number 2 with 200,000. You can't beat Bitcoin, but 200,000 is doing pretty well. That was my
and if you
pleasure talking with you guys.
And if you mentioned Tom Woods to Gene, I think he gives you a drink at the house. Is that still going on?
Free drink.
Yep.
Woods. Absolutely. It's free drink at the bar if you say Tom Woods to me.
All
but
right.
You have to say it in person.
I had to say it in person. Gene, thank you so much for coming on, sir. It was a pleasure.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
I'm now motivated when I go to Vienna to go find the origin of the Austrian school. Do you think there's like a house I could take a picture of?
Well, if you look up Tom Woods, he was just over there getting some award as a lifetime Austrian. So I don't know where he was, but he was. So.
I don't know. It originated in Vienna, so
Okay, interesting.
if anyone knows where in Vienna,
Yeah. That would be good to know.
message me. Send me an email so I can go take a picture.
It was good to get Gene on, and he...
Yeah, I had no idea we were out of the inverted yield curve.
Well,
I thought we were still inverted. So
I knew it happened and it ended. I haven't, with being out of the country last month, I didn't know where it was, but I knew it happened and it ended. But I was curious what the impact of it was, if it was, since it was such a short time period, if it still meant the same signal or not. But anyways, he's such a wealth of knowledge. It's so funny because for the listener's perspective, I think we told him we won't talk about the inverted yield curve is it. And next thing you know, we're talking about Russia and he's talking about this and that and GDPs of Italy and NATO expansion and all that good stuff.
There's a lot to learn there.
Okay, well, Ellen, where will you be this week? You teased Bloomberg. Where else?
Well, I'll actually physically be in Vienna.
That's right.
Hopefully I'll make it there. I'm a little concerned about the flight delays, but we'll see. I'll get there. I'm going to be in Vienna. I'm going to be at the OPEC meeting, sitting in the press room with everybody else, waiting for them to make a decision about what their production is going to be, and which, of course, we all know they will not adhere to. So it's going to be fun. I will be on Bloomberg. I was already on TD Ameritrade, and I will repost that I did a quick look at oil market outlook for the week, which was really fun, and on investing.com and Forbes.
TD Ameritrade is now owned by Charles Schwab, so...
That's who bought it. I knew somebody bought it.
There you go.
I couldn't remember who.
At some point. That old
yeah.
So anyways, Ellen, it was good to catch up. We will be back next week, probably with Dr. Dean Foreman. It is his regular scheduled time, so hopefully we can get him on. If not, I'm sure we'll have a lot of other stuff to talk about, including China and Russia conspiring to march on New York. Oh, wait, no, hold on. Gene.
Oh, no.
Gene put the end of that. So
he dissuaded us from that.
Listeners, thank you so much. I will listen to the Hedge Eye report or whatever it was in Twitter, and we'll talk about that in 2 weeks and talk about that.
Yeah, that's a good idea. They're often very spot on in their OPEC predictions.
Okay.
So
we'll give that a listen to, and we'll talk to you next week.